بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فمن يرد الله أن يهديه يشرح صدره للإسلام، ومن يرد أن يذله يجعل صدره ضيقا حرجا كأنما يسعد في السماء كذلك يجعل الله الرجس على الذين لا يؤمنون. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'ajil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. أعظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بذكر المسائب يا أبا عبد الله. May Allah increase in our reward for commemorating the difficulties of Abu Abdullah, the Masa'ib of Ali Muhammad. The discussion that we're having in these nights is on the concept of justice. And through this concept of justice, we're addressing certain issues that we may see or have in contemporary environment. And as such, the fundamental of today's unwan, the topic of today's discussion, is on the idea of predestination, associating and clarifying the relationship between, is there predestination, is there free will? If Allah is aware of everything that we do, then how is it possible that we can be punished or rewarded, because Allah already knows what we're going to do before He created us? So it's a problem. And many times this problem gets impacted into different pieces of the discussion. Let me explain what I mean. Looking at this concept of predestination, one of the conversations that happens and comes up is the question that, what was it that happened in Karbala? Yani Imam Hussain knew that he was going to be killed, and why did he go? And mistaken, I'll tell you right off the bat, we don't need to discuss this further, but we will. Mistakenly, some people said, no, Imam Hussain, na'uzubillah, killed himself because he knew he was going to die and he went anyway. I said, Allah wanted him to do this. This entire concept is incorrect, but to understand it, we have to break it down. And to break this concept down, one of the first points that we talk about is the idea of what is suicide. What is suicide? Now, we know that suicide is an action that is haram in the religion of Islam. However, where we find conflict is that though suicide is haram, one of the places where questions are asked is that then why do we bury the person according to the rites of Islam? Let me explain. This question actually came up very recently, that a young boy, a young man in Pakistan, he was found in a condition that indicated that he had killed himself. And the community in turn became divided. Some said, no, don't bring him into the masjid. Don't pray over him. He's no longer a Muslim. He's a mulhid. He left the religion of Islam. Others said, is that right or is that wrong? And the question became asked that what's the right and what's the position of this person? To explain very quickly, it's to understand that yes, killing oneself is a sin. But does that cast you out of the religion of Islam? We commit many sins. Sometimes people know of those sins. Sometimes people don't know of those sins. Does someone knowing the sin I committed make me not a Muslim anymore? And this is where the point comes in, is that they look at it and they say this was a public sin, or na'uzubillah, this is a grave sin. Yes, there are many grave sins, but Allah has specified that just because one commits a sin doesn't mean they're cast out of the religion of Islam. Secondly, this concept of suicide is not a very clear issue. Let me explain. On the apparent nature, it looks as if someone has intentionally taken their own life. However, even amongst, for example, now in our society, the science and the research that has been done on this topic, it's not so clear-cut. There's a very nice book that's written called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell, where he outlines and explains some of the identity and structure behind the concept of suicide. And it's an important concept to understand because it actually makes us appreciate the rules of Islam, that should someone perform this action, they're not cast out of the religion. They're not considered bad people. They went through a difficulty. In his analysis on the topic, he brings to the conversation, he says, of 500 people who tried to jump off of the bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge in California, 500 people were stopped. Of those 500 people, how many of them actually went and found an alternate means to kill themselves? 50. The fundamental he lays out in this structure is, he says, and he explains the point that at a moment of difficulty, when someone is going through a problem, it can happen that that person believes that the correct solution to that problem is, na'uzubillah, to take their own life. But once that difficulty passes, the intention to kill oneself also passes as well too. Meaning that no one, or 90% of people, na'uzubillah, who wind up in this situation are in a state of difficulty and they don't know how to solve that difficulty, that they make a bad decision. In Islam, we say that someone who winds up in this condition is in halatil junoon. They've lost their intellect because they're no longer thinking about the consequences of their action, and they've essentially gone into a state of craziness. And in that moment of craziness, they've committed this action. Not that their intention was, or that they acknowledge that Allah has forbidden this, but rather the condition itself that came over them caused them to come to this conclusion. Had they been outside of that, or been in an inability to overcome that situation, they would have never performed this action to begin with. So this teaches us a few different lessons. One, from the social communal aspect, is that stay connected, be a resource, and be helpful to one another, that you never know who amongst us is going through a difficulty. And that being able to reach out to one another and to be able to ask for support in moments of difficulty is one of the benefits of Iman and brotherhood, that we understand each other's priorities, ideologies, and to be a support system for one another. The other aspect is that we don't condemn. We don't condemn. If Allah has insisted that though this person may have in apparent nature taken their life, that our job is to fulfill their rights and treat them as a Muslim, we don't deny them those rights, no matter the situation that they go through. And that Islam has a more comprehensive view of knowing what a person goes through, that society is now starting to uncover. That Islam always said that should a person be in this condition, they still reserve the rights of Islam and they are not condemned. Allah has the right to decide what to do with them. Now society is learning as well too, that a person who goes through this condition isn't always a flawed individual looking to end their life, but sometimes the circumstance of difficulty, they don't know how to deal with it and they make a bad decision. So Islam has already structured this position for us and taught us that this is not something that we condemn someone by, but rather that should someone go through this, we still have the obligation to give them the rights of Islam and Muslimin. And if they have committed a sin, it does not cast them outside of the religion. So it becomes an important point to understand and something to pay attention to. One of the reasons why this conversation, we need to have this conversation, is the impact of environment. That in this environment and country that we live in, there are various things that affect our children and our community that make this seem almost reasonable. Not long ago, there was a program that was made, 13 Reasons Why, that actually promoted this concept in children who started thinking that maybe this is a good idea and we should do this. And our children are not immune to this. If you're not censoring your children's television, don't be surprised when they start behaving like these people and coming up with these strange ideas. Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam explains, he says, إن القلب الحدث كالأرض الخالية ما تلقي فيها قبلها. That the hearts of a believer, of a child, is like fertile ground. Whatever you plant in it, it will accept it. Our children are fertile ground. You can't leave them alone to be influenced by these outside sources. If we haven't talked to them about this being a bad idea, meaning they have no opinion on the concept of suicide, and the first thing they see is something that promotes suicide, your child's going to accept it. That's what Imam Ali is teaching us. That we have to both do two things. One, talk about difficult issues with our children and with our families, grandchildren, nephews, nieces. And two, protect them, that if we haven't talked about a subject, don't let others influence them first. Because legitimately, in the past year, there have been at least 2 children that we've had to counsel and deal with who are in the opinion that suicide is a legitimate option because they're facing difficulties in life. And the ideas came from TV and movies. That they watched these things and saw this as a good idea and they wanted to implement in their lives. And that's not okay. That means we're not doing a good job of communicating, and we need to work on this. Moving on to the second part of our discussion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What were the actions of Imam Hussain in Karbala? That did he knowingly go to a conclusion that was known to be harmful to him? Did he intentionally expose himself to harm? Did he try to cause himself harm? No, none of this is true. All of this is misinterpretation of terminology, and it has happened in our recent history that some ulama mistakenly have used the wrong words without understanding the consequences of those words. But to understand what happens in Karbala explains, and we need to understand what is the ma'rifat and understanding that the Imam possesses that we don't possess. That an Imam, his status and his knowledge is so complete that he continues to perform the right action regardless of the danger that it puts him in. How? Let me explain from the hadith from our 6th Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam. Why is an Imam sinless? An Imam is not sinless because Allah places angels around him and says, don't do this. An Imam is sinless because of his knowledge. That the Imam's knowledge is so perfect that he sees the reality of the sin. As our 6th Imam, when he explains, he says, we do not sin because we see the reality of that sin and we see how ugly it is. So therefore we don't want to perform it. This is something achievable. Look in our time. There was a time maybe 30 years ago, let's not say more than that, but 30 years ago, was it common to sit with a seatbelt in your car when you were driving? No. Was it common to smoke cigarettes and children were doing it? Yes. What happened? We increased in our knowledge as a society, and we learned the consequences of not wearing a seatbelt. Now, if I see someone not wearing a seatbelt, I say this is qabih, this is bad. Why? Because I understand the consequences of that action. Therefore, for me to do the right thing is because of my knowledge, not because a farishta, an angel came and told me, don't do this. The same is the concept when we take a look at the idea that our knowledge is what protects us from the aspect of smoking and these drugs and diseases. When people didn't understand the consequences of the smoking, they would do it. Now, when we learn the consequences of this smoking, we see it as something ugly. We see it as something bad because we understand what is the negative aspect of it and what is inappropriate about it. In the same sense, the Imam explains their sinlessness is that when they see the sin in front of them, they see it as ugly and bad and unattractive because they understand the consequences of that action in the eyes of Allah, and they prefer the love of Allah over anything else in this life. Meaning the knowledge of the Imam is complete. Through the knowledge of the Imam, Allah has given him sinlessness and made him ma'soom. The significance of this point is to understand and see that Allah wants us to follow this path to be sinless, which is why He wants us to be knowledgeable. He wants us to strive in this way that as we increase our knowledge, the consequence of that increase in knowledge is that we stay away from sin, because we begin to see the ugliness of that sinning. We begin to see the consequences of that sinning. But the completion of the knowledge of the Imam, from the one side, it keeps the Imam away from sinning, and from the other side, it makes the priority the pleasure of Allah regardless of the consequences. And this is what we saw in Karbala. The Imam was not throwing away his life. The Imam entreated that nation, those people, to acknowledge his rights and his position from before the day of Ashura, during the day of Ashura, and even before his Shahadat. He implored them to submit to the will of Allah and to respect the sanctity of the family of Rasulullah. And they refused. And they said, the only way we will set you free is that if you submit, na'uz billah, to Yazid, mal'un. And the Imam is showing that I know the importance and the pleasure and the significance of the command of Allah, such that this action is so detestable to me that there is no condition in which, regardless of what happens to me, that I will submit to evil, because I know the value of goodness in the eyes of Allah. This is the aspect of understanding what happens in Karbala, that we learn and we see that goodness with Allah, there is nothing that can take us away from it. Now, for us as normal people, Allah has given us the freedom, that He has given us the tools of, for example, taqiyya as well too. That if you can recognize the goodness of Allah, but your life is in danger, you have the freedom. It's not wajib. You have the freedom to go and choose the ability to save your life. But the Imam is such a person that his actions are the representation of the religion of Islam. That when you want to see what does Allah want on this earth, you look at the Imam. And the Imam's responsibility is to protect that religion and ensure that that religion persists regardless of the sacrifice that's made. And these were the actions of Imam Hussain in Karbala. If you want to see in history how this changed history, take a look and see that before the events of Karbala, the Khalifa was someone who had both political authority and religious authority. After the event of Karbala, a Khalifa was a politician, not a source of religion. In all of Islam, after this waqiyah, you see the Khalifa, when he sits, he has to call someone from the religion to tell him what does Islam want from him. His word is not the word of Islam anymore. The sacrifice of Imam Hussain preserved the religion, saved the religion. How? By ensuring that people learned and saw that this dhalim cannot speak for Allah. This dhalim is only a king and has no relationship to Allah. This was one of the important processes of why the Imam chose to make this sacrifice. Now the question is, was the Imam forced to make this sacrifice? Was there predestination involved? The discussion about predestination meaning that Allah has already decided what we're going to do and forces us to do those things. Or the other side is free will, that I can choose to do whatever I want and no one can stop me and no one can restrict me. Al-faraq bayn al-jabr wa tafweed. Jabr is that I am forced to do these actions, predestination. Allah makes me do these things. And free will, that I can do whatever I want and there is nothing in here that stops me. Amongst the Muslimin, there are four main schools of thought in this matter. One we'll mention is the old school of thought, the Mu'tazila, who believed entirely in tafweed and says Allah has nothing to do with nothing and man is free, he can do anything he wants to. The second was the Mujabira, who believed in Jabr and said that no, man has no choice in what he does, but rather it is as Allah has commanded him, he has to do exactly what Allah insists, because Allah is all-knowing, Allah knows what he will do, Allah has already created you, knowing everything that will happen, you have no control in this matter. The Ash'ari school of thought is very similar to the Jabira, but they came up with different terminology. They called it kasb. That a man, his history or his future is written, but he can change some of his actions by asking Allah for assistance. The Shia school of thought learned the ideology from our sixth Imam, Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam. That when the Imam was asked, he said, لا جبر ولا تفويض بل أمر بين الأمرين. That the Imam explains and he says, it is neither entirely free will, nor is it entirely predestination. Rather, it is a matter between these 2 points. And when the Imam Shalon, you see, كيف يصير? How is this possible? The Imam said, I'll explain to you. He said to the person asking the question, he said, stand up. Stay seated, don't get up. The Imam said to the man, stand up. The man stood up. He said, Yabna Rasulullah, as you command. The Imam says, raise one of your feet off the ground. He raised one foot off the ground. Imam now said, raise the other foot off the ground. And the man said, Yabna Rasulullah, I can't. And this is where the Imam explains, this is the Amr bain al-amrain. This is the command between the two, that some things you have the discretion over that you can choose to do, and some things are restricted for you that you don't have the control over to change. Now, before we get into the Quranic discussion of this, there are many points within this that how do we identify when an affair is between these two matters? One aspect of this is understanding Allah's knowledge. You see, we agree, no one doubts, that Allah is all knowledgeable. And we agree that He knows everything we're going to do. But where we forget and where we make a mistake is understanding the idea that Allah is not limited by time or by place. When we say Allah is not limited by place, we say that it's not that Allah is in one place such that He is not in another place. That there is no place that you can say that Allah is not present. And the same thing when we say that Allah is not limited by time, that there is no time that I can say Allah wasn't so that I can say Allah was. Understanding this concept that Allah is not limited by time is where we make the mistake of imagining that Allah sees time the way we do in a linear fashion. But Allah not being limited by time means that Allah sees the past, the present, and the future simultaneously, because time is not a limitation of Allah. So when we say that Allah knows what we're going to do, it's not that Allah is sitting there watching, okay, pick it up. No. This is not the relate, because then Allah is limited by time that He is captured in that moment in time that I am present in at that moment. The way to understand Allah's knowledge of a person, and this is an analogy to try and explain it, is when you look at a painting, I can see the entirety of the painting, but I don't know which brushstroke the artist chose to do first, second, or last. Meaning that we are the artists of our life and we are painting this picture. Allah is aware of the entirety of the picture, and it is our discretion in the process of how we will bring this picture into existence. We choose what that picture, how it came into conclusion, is our discretion. Allah's knowledge is not forcing me to perform an action. Rather, it is that my freedom to choose those actions that allows me to do it, because I am in the moment, but Allah is aware of all things. Everybody's okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There are two other ways of explaining this, and I'll lay them out for you for the interest, because this question of predestination and free will is one that definitely affects our children. That our religion tells us of these attributes of God that seem to conflict with, then why am I alive? Why do I have anything to do? Because if Allah already knows. But Allah's knowledge and involvement in my life is not a restriction of my life. The example comes, we're sitting in Ohio. I know where I am, thank you. I want to go. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi. I don't want to go. I'll stay. I make the intention to visit my friend in Toledo. I can make the intention myself. I can choose to go. But then when it comes time to go, I am in need of this vehicle. I can make all of the intentions, I can make the preparations, I can do everything, but if I turn on the car and the car doesn't start, do I go? No. The same is the concept with Allah's involvement in my free will. That my discretion is that I wish to complete an action, I wish to desire to do something, but without the assistance of Allah in completing that process, the object will not be completed. That Allah assists us in this process. We have the discretion, we may choose to do something, but without the assistance of Allah, we cannot bring it to its fruition or its completion. Hence, the affair is between predestination and free will, that we make the intention to accomplish something. We move in that direction, but sometimes that object doesn't come to its conclusion. And this is why we say that it was without the assistance, or we did not have the help of Allah in this affair, that Allah did not want us to accomplish this. It's not that Allah refused us. We had the discretion to move in that direction, but Allah then limited it. And the mercy of Allah is such. The mercy of Allah is such that, na'udhu billah, if it was a sin and Allah stopped me, did not make it possible for me to complete this action, there's no punishment on me. But if that action was to be a good deed, and for some reason I was stopped in the process of completing it, Allah rewards me for the intention of doing that goodness that I intended. So not only does Allah get involved, but He makes it such that I can be rewarded for this action. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now, one of the places where, for example, people conflict on this idea is the verse that we began our discussion with. And this verse in particular is one of the verses that people used to say that, no, I have no right to choose. Allah is the one who is in control of me and stops me and prevents me, and Allah is the one who owns my right in this affair. In the 6th surah, the 125th verse, Allah makes the statement, He says, فَمَنْ يَرِدِ اللَّهُ أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. That in the verse it says, whoever Allah intends that He would guide him aright, He expands for him his breast, his chest for Islam. وَمَنْ يُرِدَ أَنْ يُذِلَّهُ يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا كَأَنَّمَا يَسْعَدُ فِي السَّمَاءِ كَذَلِكَ يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ رِجْسًا عَلَى الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. This verse is sometimes used as an attack to say that you people, you say that we have free will, but Allah here is telling you that if Allah wants to guide you, He makes it easy for you. And if Allah wants to misguide you, He makes your chest tight, where it's as if you are climbing into the sky and you can't breathe. If Allah is doing this, then how is it that I have free will? The understanding of this verse is important to know that Allah's instruction here is not with the basis of saying that Allah has stopped you, but that there are consequences to the decisions that you make in life. If I move in the direction of Allah and I move towards Allah, Allah makes it easy for me to come to Him. If I sin and move away from Allah, Allah makes it difficult for me to turn back to Allah and come to Him. This is what Allah is saying, is that your actions change how your ability to receive the guidance of Allah is. If I move towards Allah, Allah will be the one who offers me assistance and improves my chances. If I move away from Allah, it will be harder for me to turn back to Him and come to Him and ask Him for guidance. Meaning our decisions are what have consequences. If we take one step towards Allah, Allah makes it that He makes it easy for us to go towards Him and to find hidayah with Him. Ya Rasulullah, Ya Ali, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The mistaken understanding of this verse is to say that, oh, Allah has already decided. The correct understanding of this verse is that if I take even one small step towards Allah, Allah will make it easy for me to come to Him. If I make small decisions in goodness with consideration of what Allah wants from me, then He will open the path in front of me to attain great things with Him. It's a misunderstanding where people say that, oh, Allah has already, no, Allah has told you the consequences, that come to me and I will make it easy for you. Go away from me and it will be hard to come back to me. If you find it difficult to do good deeds, it's because the sins that we are performing prevent us from coming back to Allah. When we remove those sins and we turn back to Allah, it will become easy for us to accomplish those goals. And the beauty of understanding what it means to move towards Allah, one of the best ways is through the love of Ali Muhammad. It is through this love of Ahlul Bayt that it becomes easy for us to go towards Allah. And the more that we love this Ahlul Bayt, the faster, the easier it is to get attached to Allah. Look at the example that we're talking about tonight of Habib ibn Madahir. Habib's understanding of Ahlul Bayt was such that it gave him a position that till today, when you go to Karbala, the grave of Habib is separate from the rest of the Shuhada. The reason for that is that this Habib was the commander of the army. And that you go to the commander of the army to register as a part of the army. That you go to him and you ask him, Sajilni, writes me amongst those who are amongst the supporters of Abu Abdullah. The ma'rifat that Habib had of Ahlul Bayt was something unique, and that's what raised him to this status. Look and see that Habib was the one who there's a narration as Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam walked in the markets of Medina with Mazahir, the father of Habib. It said that Habib and Imam Hussain were walking behind Rasulullah in Mazahir. And at one point in time, Rasulullah stops as he's walking with Mazahir, turns around and begins to kiss this Habib. And the father asks, Yabna Rasulullah, what did my boy do? Rasulullah replies, Oh Mazahir, we the Anbiya see behind us the same way we see in front of us. As you and I are walking this way, I am aware of what is behind us, the same as if it was in front of me. And I see this Habib of yours walking behind my Hussein. And every so often he lifts the dirt from the feet of Hussein and he kisses it. This Habib of yours has a love for my Hussein. And I love this Habib for his love of my Hussein. This is why when Imam Hussein found himself isolated in the field of Karbala, there weren't many people that he called to, but one that he called to was this Habib. And the narrations explain that Habib was in his house. And he was sitting to the table of dinner when a messenger of Imam Hussein came and presented him with a letter. Habib received the letter and returned to dinner, and his wife asked him, Oh Habib, who has come to our door at this time? He says, it is a messenger from my master who has sent me a letter. And the wife of Habib knows that we are waiting for this master, for Imam Hussein, to come to the city of Kufa. And the condition of Kufa has become such that it is difficult for the Imam to come and it is difficult for anyone to leave. And she says, Habib, what is your intention then? If your Imam has called you, what do you intend to do? Habib has seen what happened in the city of Kufa, that there were many who had promised to support Imam Hussein, but when fear overcame them of their families being adversely affected, of their families being isolated, of being attacked, many people left the support of Imam Hussein. Habib wanted to see and ensure that his lineage would be true to Ahlul Bayt. Similar to this was the example of Hujr ibn Adi. Hujr ibn Adi was that one who wanted to ensure that his family was on the path of Ahlul Bayt even after he was gone. So when Hujr and his son were taken to be assassinated, what does Hujr say? Hujr says, kill my son before me. They said, oh old man, we are trying to do you an honor that you should not see your child killed in front of you. It is a difficult thing for a man to witness his son killed. We want to give you the honor that you don't have to see your son killed in front of you. Hujr says, but it is more important for me that if I should be killed in front of my son, that he doesn't turn away from Ali ibn Abi Talib. So he says, I'd rather see my son killed than know that my lineage turned away from Ahlul Bayt. Habib had the same ma'rifat that he sits and he says, knowing that some of the women and children would be upset, he wanted to see what was the status of his family. He says, but if I go to Hussein, what will happen to you? Who will take care of you? Who will provide for our son Qasim? The wife of Habib says, Habib, if this is your concern, then you stay home with the children. I am going to Hussein. Habib says, this is enough. This is what I needed to know, that my lineage will follow the love of Ahlul Bayt even if I am not here, and you will not be afraid by these material losses. So Habib could not leave the city of Kufa itself easily. So he sent his servant and he said, take my horse outside of the boundary of Kufa to go and to get it food and to that graze the horse. And in the middle of the night, I will come to you and I will leave to go to Hussein. Because the condition was such that if Habib had tried to leave the city with his horse, they would not have left him to go. They would have prevented him. So Habib came up with a plan. It's said that in the middle of the night, Habib became late getting through security to get out. He catches his servant having a conversation with his horse. Oh, horse, be patient. Our master has said that he will go to Abu Abdullah. Be patient, you will be in the service of our Imam soon. But I swear to you, O horse, if our master is delayed, I will take you to the Nusrat of Hussein. I will take you to the help of Hussein. Habib wonders and he says, how gharib is my Imam that the slaves are fighting that they should go to the aid of Abu Abdullah. Habib takes his horse and he says, oh slave, you are set free from this moment. The slave complains, as John complained in the field of Karbala, that we ate from the table of Ahlul Bayt when there was plenty, and today when they are in need, you prevent us from supporting them. The slave says, I will run behind you, Habib, if you don't have a horse for me. Let me go to the aid of Abu Abdullah. It was this Habib, in his love of Ahlul Bayt, who was made the commander of the army of the companions of Imam Hussein. And it was this Habib that led these companions into the battlefield and was the one who would promote them and motivate them. Such that when Muslim ibn Awsaja is lying in the battlefield and Imam Hussein comes to his side, he asks his Imam, oh Imam, are you happy with me? And the Imam replies, oh Muslim, I am pleased with your sacrifice. My grandfather is pleased with your sacrifice. Habib says, oh Muslim, if I wasn't about to leave this earth, I would ask you if you have any wasiyah for me to fulfill for you. Muslim ibn Awsaja, in his final breath, he says, oh Habib, don't leave this Imam. Don't leave him alone in this field of Karbala. Habib, the environment is frightening. The companions are few, but Habib, the one thing I tell you is that don't leave Hussein. Habib did not leave the Imam even after the time of prayer. He was one of the few that were left, and he fought against the enemies, such that Malhuf narrates and says that Habib killed over 62 of the enemies of Imam Hussein, and he would call out. He said, I swear to you, O enemies of Abu Abdullah, had we even been half in number, you would run from us. Now we are 72, and that's why you are brave against us. Habib fought until the end, and when they killed him, they wanted to disgrace this Habib. They wanted him to be known for ignobility, for being in the support and leader of the companions of Imam Hussein and leader of the soldiers of Imam Hussein. So when every head was raised on a spear, they took the head of Habib after the event of Karbala and hung it from the neck of a horse so that the horse would kick Habib as it walked. When they entered into Kufa, the man of Banu Tamim who carried the horse of Habib from his head would notice a young boy come and look at this face with ta'ajjub, with wonder. He called to this child. He said, child, what do you want from me? The boy ran away. Again, the second time the boy came and would look at the eyes of this head hanging from the horse. All of the other heads were above. Everyone would look up, but this boy would look at the neck of the horse. The third time the boy came, the soldier stopped him and grabbed him and he said, boy, what do you come here for? Why are you coming to me? Why are you not like the others? The boy says, oh soldier, oh Jundi, هذا رأس أبي. This is the head of my father, Habib. Will you return the head of my father to me that I may bury it? We would say, Habib would call out, Qasim, you ask of my head, ولكن هذا رأس الحسين. Here is the head of Hussain on a stair. How can you ask for me to be buried? Don't you know that my master has been laying in the field of Karbala for 3 days under the open sun? ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. ماتم حسين.